Today I want to talk about Don Juan's fear, clarity, power paradigm. From my perspective, this is the part of the spiritual journey, the beginning part, up through the 51% soul identity. So this would be basically the main seeking component of spirituality. Don Juan labeled it as three natural enemies to perception: fear, clarity, and power. And from my experience, this was extremely accurate um, in terms of how I experienced it myself. So when we first start the spiritual process, we go through what's called fear. And it's essentially, as you start growing and moving into yourself, you feel scared. And the fear is driven primarily of um, moving into the unknown. So spirituality is all about moving your perspective into the unknown. And when you first start doing that, there's so much ego identity that it feels daunting. More than that, it actually feels it's terrifying, because you don't have the stability yet in your sense of self outside of the ego, and all the world around you is so egocentric. You feel like you're crazy for moving into it. And in some ways, you have to be a little bit, you could say, adventurous or a risk taker, or out of your mind, I guess, in a pretty literal way, because you're shifting your identity to something that's new and you don't know what it's going to be. And as you do that, it feels painful. But there's a part of you inside of it that knows that it's real. From my experience, it took about 3 years to work through fear. I was working on spirituality every day. This is probably between 2007 2010. And it was grueling. I remember crying pretty frequently, or just feeling really depressed. And my family would ask me, like, hey, are you depressed? And I'd be like, not necessarily in the traditional sense, but I was definitely processing a lot of baggage. Here, what's happening is your baggage is coming up, but you don't necessarily have the skills to process that baggage effectively or quickly. So a lot of times something will come up and then it'll get pushed back down, because say maybe you're reacting to it, and you're not staying centered, so you push it back down. This is definitely where meditation or yoga or whatever quiets the mind is key. I had to do a lot of meditation because my mind was so busy in this. Eventually it gets easier. Basically, you just have to keep pushing and focus on growth and learning to love yourself unconditionally. That's another way to look at this level, is going from more conditional to a state of unconditional love. Because what you have to see is all parts of yourself and love those parts. I often use the MBTI, something I've been interested in since I was a teenager, of where when you're working on your ego, you're working on your true strengths. So for instance, I'm an INTJ, so when I was in reason, or the ego-based levels, I was working on intuition and thinking. And as you move into spirituality, you start working on your weaknesses. So for me, that's feeling and sensing. So a lot of it had to do with being vulnerable and open with my feelings. And then with sensing, it'd be just dealing with body issues, body image issues, just lethargy, being lazy, feeling lazy. So fear, essentially you have to face fear itself and move through it. There's really no way around it, because part of you is going to want to avoid it, but you can't. So the next stage, if you're able to work through fear, and realizing that fear is just a feeling, so it's just something you move through, and what you realize when you face it fully is it has no power over you. And fear is not necessarily, it's useful when it's at times, but you don't want it guiding your life necessarily. So after that is clarity, and this is where you get some stability. This is where I felt like I had some detachment develop for the first time, where I felt like, oh, okay, I can see things more clearly. I can see my ego more clearly, to a point where I felt like I was effective in helping people who were in fear or below. I've always had kind of a teacher dynamic, an interesting insight, I guess you could say, but this was a time where it felt like I had real insight. And clarity, as Don Juan says, is itself a trap. The challenge with clarity is it's hard to know what you don't know, and it becomes like a bubble in the sense that you think you know more than you do. So for me, clarity was something that took me about 3 years also to work through. And I remember the biggest challenge for me in clarity, and I know this for other people I've helped work through it, is you think you're further along than you do. Every time I would grow or work through something, might take me months to come back because my ego would think that I was much further away or further along than I was. Because the next level is power, and there's kind of a challenge. If you already know power exists as a thing, then you want to feel like you're already in power. So that was always really hard for me, is because I was working on this stuff every day. It became my whole life, and I always wanted to be further than I was. But just like clarity, you have to push through. You have to be real with yourself, and this is honest. Like, this is a marathon, not a sprint. You have to kind of assume that you're not as far as long as you think you are, and that's okay. This stuff can take 10, 20, 30 years to work through and process. The main point is intentionality and just focusing on growing, because that's the only thing that'll make you happier. That's the only thing that your soul really craves or desires. And your soul's patient. You don't have to. If you stay in fear your whole life, or if you just, that's progress. You'll come back. We all come back probably hundreds of times, if not more. So anyway, clarity is about gaining more and more insight into yourself. So a lot of people on the spiritual path are in clarity. If you've worked through fear and you feel like you have kind of a somewhat stable footing, you very well could be in clarity. For me, I felt that was my confidence started to develop, particularly later in clarity. Early clarity was still pretty challenging. But the challenge at the end of clarity is you feel like you're in your comfort zone still. Like, you don't really want to take risks or jump out. This particularly comes up with your last personality function. So for me, sensing. So I remember in power, or shifting from clarity to power, it was really about jumping into the unknown. And not just getting out of my comfort zone in general, but taking a risk where I felt like that was really scary. So that was when I started moving around with my partner. We just started moving places without, a really much of a plan or money, and just kind of hope things would work out. But that power was just jumping in and just believing in a higher power, orchestrating it and kind of setting you up for success or whatever. So power is basically learning to trust or jump before it makes sense, and then things will follow you. Things will kind of like fall into place as you need it. As Bashar says, the law of abundance is you get what you need when you need it. You don't need it earlier. You just need it when you need it. And learning to trust the universe and just jump within reason. Like, you want to stretch yourself. You don't want to jump in a way that is too overwhelming. So for me, I've had experiences where I would jump too far, and then my beliefs wouldn't really allow me to support myself. So then I had to kind of backtrack. That is frustrating, and I mean, that's part of the journey. And really, the only part of us that really cares is our ego. So just focusing on, hey, this is ego, this is what I need to work through, and just spiritual growth and progress is just about grinding and pushing through and realizing that it's okay if things don't go the way you want. It's okay if it's not fast. Just keep pushing further and further and further. There's always more, and really nothing in the physical reality is going to satiate you, not in the way that you think. So yeah, and then power, the other thing I had to deal with, which was really tough for me, was being attached to growth itself. Essentially at this level, all the tools I would use for growth that felt reliable just stopped working. And what I realized was just my ego was attached to literally wanting to grow, because it was the most important thing to me. So eventually I had to work through that and process that. And this power took another 4 years until I hit 600, or the first awakening experience, around 2017 or so, about 10 years into the journey. So yeah, fear, clarity, power. You don't really need to know it in terms of working through your spiritual powers. Everyone who's in these levels, you're in one of them. You have to work through these levels, and it's fine if you don't need to necessarily name it or identify it or even know it exists. It's kind of it was just a cool map that I found Don Juan had that really resonated, and it was something that really helped. And I remember being like, all right, if I work through this, I should be in clarity. And I remember it's what happened, like when I worked through fear, because I knew about the fear, clarity, power before, which was good and bad, because sometimes it hindered me, but sometimes it helped. But yeah, I just wanted to give like a little intro on fear, clarity, power. I hope you liked it. If you like this, just I'll be posting more about spirituality, just general topics, just casual, just getting my voice out there, honestly, just to help almost clarify my thoughts, even just have fun with it. All right, hope you enjoyed. Thanks.